Well, hey, before you find your seat, I need you to do something on your way down. If you are socially close to the person, I need you to ask them, are you in love? Just go ahead and ask them. Go ahead, you can find your seat now. Are you in love? Are you? Come on online. How about you? Those that are watching on our online campus, are you in love? I'm really curious. All right, let's just kind of get started. There is no on-ramp. We're jumping right in today. How many of you would say right now you're in love? Come on, how many of y'all? Yeah, the husbands, both hands better be in the air. Like you just do care. That's all. Like, we're getting a start on Valentine's. All right, sir, I'm trying to hook you up. How about you online? Are you in love? How many of you are not in love, but you're looking? Hey, come on, put your hand up. We see you. Don't be shy. How about online? Let's turn the online campus into an online dating website. Type in the chat, single, looking to mingle. Come on, I'm looking for love in all the right places. That's all I'm saying. Listen, this is for free. I've officiated a lot of weddings from people who met one another at Life Point. I'm just saying, it's a good place to be single. That's all I'm trying to say. Love is interesting. Love is interesting. I've realized recently, last several years or so, that there really is a difference between love and so love. Have you caught on to this? Now, this isn't like my idea. This is actually an idea that's in the Bible. Matter of fact, the most famous verse I think that we would credit the Bible for is John 3:16. I'm willing to guess that even if you're not a church person, maybe you just came today for the free lunch that somebody offered you if you would come, or you were scrolling on Facebook and you found this link, and whatever it is, I bet you've heard John 3:16. Let's look at the verse. You know this. Here's what it says. It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life." Now, what's interesting about this verse is all the times that I've read it, seen it on a billboard, painted underneath Tim Tebow's eyes when he played for Florida, I never realized that, have you noticed this? It doesn't say, "For God loved the world," does it? No, it says he what? Come on, he so loved the world that he gave us Jesus. And I begin to realize that there is a difference between love and so love. There are things in this life that I love. I love me a good food truck. Come on, somebody. I don't know what it is. Yeah, it just tastes better if it's coming out of the side of a truck. It could be tacos, barbecue, fried Oreos. Some of y'all are getting hungry right now. I mean, the food equity quality goes way up if you're serving it out of the back of a truck. Are you with me? Yeah, I love it. But I don't so love it. I'm man enough to tell you this. I love me a fresh pair of shoes. Come on, do the ladies got my back? Wow, this is rough when even the women aren't even cheering me on. How about you online? I love it, I do. I love the smell of the fresh, you get all up in that shoe. I love a fresh pair of shoes, but I don't so love a fresh pair of shoes. No. So love, I think I really experienced when it came to me starting a family. That's when I understood, I think for the first time, the difference between love and so love is when I started having kids. And when you experience so love, listen, it will make you do things that makes no sense to everybody else around you. Have you experienced this? Like my daughter, for example, her name's Rosalie. She's 7, second grade. This just happened to me about 3 weeks ago. She played soccer for the very first time. And I know what you're expecting me to say, right? This is where the pastor brags about how amazing his daughter is, and she's a prodigy and the best on the team, and all 3 high school JV soccer coaches were there scouting her out at 7 years old. But you're wrong. She was horrible. I mean, embarrassing, horrible. And you're like, that's really mean. No, that's honest, okay? You could use some of that honesty when it comes to your kid's talent. It's not a parenting message, Nate. Anyways, she had never played before. This is her first time ever playing an organized sport. She'd done gymnastics, but never played an organized team sport. And she was bad. Don't worry, she's in Discovery Point. She has good self-esteem. Anyways, some of you are really concerned. I can see it on your face. You're like, man, you're a bad dad. And what was interesting about it was she ran funny. She couldn't kick the ball the right way. She didn't understand what was going on. She looked lost half the time. And then in the beginning of the season, she did not play hard, which is really bad for her because she has a very competitive mother. So my wife, this is great parenting, by the way. Before a Saturday game, she looked at it and she said, Rose, if you don't at least hustle, I will start dancing and twerking on the sideline. This is true. This is what we're down to, parents, okay? Because the one thing that does work for Rosalie, she gets embarrassed very easily. She's like, I don't want to see that. So it was amazing watching this progression. Like she started off, horrible, and then kind of got better, and the game kind of came a little more natural. And now here we are, we're at the very end of the season, and we're in the playoffs. Now don't worry, every team makes the playoffs in Fort Mill. I think we won maybe 2 or 3 games, a great season, great coach. And all of a sudden we're in this first playoff game. We're playing a team, high-seeded team. They beat us twice in the season by a combined 15 goals. This was a pass-through for this team. And all of a sudden in the midst of this playoff game, Rosalie, I kid you not, has a breakout game. Next thing I know, she's like dribbling the ball between defenders, looking like Mia Hamm. She's like in the goal box. She kicks the ball on goal. It not only scores, but the back of the net. She scores her first goal. And like the next thing I know, I jump out of my Cabela's camp chair and I'm running down the sideline, like yelling and cheering and screaming. Like, who does this? It's a 7 and 8-year-old girls team. But I literally, and I mean this, I could not help it. I just jump up. Next thing I know, there's this person who's me running up and down the sidelines. And then like 5 minutes later, true story, she scores her second goal. And so now I'm running up and down the bleachers. I'm high-fiving dads and chest bumping people. And they won the soccer game 2-1. Come on, give it up for Rose. Yeah, I'm like, who is this? And I'm pretty sure after the game was over, because by the way, I went to every game and no parent ever got up and ran around when their kid scored, that everybody thought I was crazy. But I didn't care, you know why? Because that's what So Love will do. So Love will make you respond in ways that look irrational to everybody else, but it makes sense to you. Why am I telling you this? Because I want to set the backdrop today that when God came to this earth, no matter what you feel about God, maybe you feel distant, maybe you feel like you're not worthy to even sing these words because of the choices that you've made in your past. I want you to know today, upon the authority of God's word, that God doesn't love you, He so loves you. And the evidence of this so love is the fact that when He saw the gap between you and humanity, He didn't send a messenger, He didn't send a priest, He didn't send a prophet, He sent Himself. Why? Because love has to go itself, and He loves you and He died for you. And when church, when you really embrace the so love of God, not the love of God, the so love of God, it will make you begin to do things that don't make sense to the people around you. I hope I live my life in such a way that you can't explain everything I do. I don't want to live in such a way that everything I do makes sense to you. Why? Because the so love of God should have a response that doesn't make sense to people who don't believe. I say this today because part 2 of our series Above and Beyond, which is preparing us for what we call our end of year giving. And I love this moment in our church every year. It's sort of a tradition where we come at the end of our year and we give God our best in the form of a financial gift. And it's sort of an offering of thanksgiving for what God has done and anticipation for what God is going to do. And of course, if you were here last week and we said that 100% of this is gonna go towards finishing phase 2 strong. And that this is the life that God has called us to live, a life that is above and beyond. This is the story today that Jesus invites you into. And to me, it's just overwhelming to know that the way that I live my life can actually live beyond my life. And today, we're gonna get to see a response that makes no logical sense around this church in Macedonia in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Matter of fact, if you have a Bible, you can get a running head start. We're gonna go to 2 Corinthians chapter 8 today, and you are about to see so love on display. That when you really get overwhelmed by the grace of God, I'm not talking about you pray a prayer, you give your life to the Lord, and you get baptized. By the way, I'm not undermining that. That is absolutely the most important decision you ever make in your life. But when you get past just that and you understand what Christ has really done and you allow Him to transform your life, you will begin to respond in ways that don't make sense. And so we're gonna see this today. 2 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul, who wrote about a third of your New Testament, is writing to a group of churches in Corinth, and he's about to use the churches in Macedonia as an example for so love. Let's see today in our text if this makes sense. I have a feeling a few things aren't gonna add up. Well, let's jump in here. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, starting in verse 1. It says, "And now brothers and sisters, so Paul's writing this to believers. He says, so now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of very severe trial and their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in, now let's just keep the blank there. What do you think would go in that blank? If in your life you were going through a severe trial and extreme poverty, we could call this 2020 in a lot of ways, what do you think would go in that blank? Maybe for you, you would say, well, obviously the logical response for going through a trial and poverty would be welled up in frustration, right? Or maybe not frustration, maybe for you it would be depression. That the severe trial, okay, maybe not depression, but maybe it was hopelessness. And I would say that if that is what you would put in the blank, that would make perfect sense for the conditions that you were experiencing. But that's not what the text says. Notice what happened. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in, here it is, rich generosity. Wow, what made this church, this group of believers, respond in a way that doesn't make sense? How do you well up rich generosity on the other side of extreme poverty? One of these two doesn't go together. Well, let's continue to read verse 3. Paul says, hey, I testify that they gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded us for the privilege. Are you reading this? The privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. They're begging Paul, let us give. And notice how it goes on. Verse 5, it says, and they exceeded our expectations. Oh my goodness, Corinthians, they gave themselves first of all to the Lord. That's where it has to start. And then by the will of God also to us. So we urged Titus, just as he had earlier made his beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. And then verse 7, but since you excel in everything, in faith and speech and knowledge and complete earnestness and in love, we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in the grace of giving. And this is in verse 8, he says, I'm not commanding you. I'm not like forcing you, but I want you to test this sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. And then he says in verse 9. He says, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that through his poverty we might become rich. I want to speak to you today. If you take notes, I encourage you to write some things down today, type it on your phone. I really want to speak to you if we're going to live this life above and beyond. I want to speak to you from the subject, draw your arrow. Come on, type it in the chat, draw your arrow. I loved last Sunday on Facebook, all the bow and arrow emojis. So get your favorite bow and arrow emoji. You can draw it if you're in the building today. Draw your arrow. I've personally loved this bow and arrow sort of theme that we are leveraging to sort of articulate, if you will, visually what the above and beyond life looks like. We said last weekend that all of us have arrows, that an arrow just simply represents opportunity. It represents your resources. It represents your talents, your abilities. And the power of an eternal perspective is that what I do with what God has given me, what I do with these arrows, how I leverage my life for the kingdom of God can actually make an eternal difference in the lives of other people. That this is the power of generosity. And so last week, Gary Heidick, our executive pastor, and myself, if you maybe watched the video or saw it online, we went down to Gary's ranch and we got a bow and arrow lesson from an actual archer expert in our church, Troy. And what was interesting about this is sort of the uncut scene that you didn't get to really enjoy on the video, was I never expected how difficult it would be to pull back the tension on the bow line. If you have ever shot a compound bow, you know what I'm talking about. I'll be honest with you, it took me like 4 tries to finally pull that bow to get it to the spot where I could release it and shoot it. Now, I'm not saying whether or not Gary was able to pull the bow back himself. I would never throw Gary under the bus, but he needed a senior bow. That's all I'm saying. But I love Gary. He's on vacation today. I will throw Anthony Dean, our visual media director, under the bus, okay? Because Anthony's like 25. If you know Anthony, he's a like really cool guy. I get around him and my coolness drops really low. He's an athlete, he's in great shape, and yet he couldn't even pull this bow all the way back because of the tension. And I wanna show you this video. This is like 4 tries into it. Check this out. You ain't hunting nothing tonight.
Oh, man.
Come on, give it up for Anthony. We love you. What a great dude. And you know, it was interesting. After I left that day and I'm driving in my car, I'm heading home, and it was like God spoke to me in my spirit. And he's like, Nate, that is exactly the tension that you will feel every time you are trying to live this above and beyond life. That there is a natural tension that will naturally come when you're trying to leverage and shoot all of your arrows for the kingdom of God, leveraging everything that you have. And you want to know why? It's because you experience tension when you're being stretched. Yeah, it's in the stretching of your life when God's trying to pull more out of you, wants your life to go further, that you'll feel the most tension. The tension happens in the stretching. And I would say if you don't feel any tension in your life, maybe it's because you're not allowing the Lord to stretch you. Ooh, I'm about to preach this mic right here. And I say this because this is exactly why Paul is writing to the churches in Corinth. They are being stretched, but they're not pushing past the tension. Here's how we know this. Paul writes this letter, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, to inform the Corinthians that the church in Jerusalem is starving to death. The history and the context is really powerful. We know that the church in Jerusalem is where the church was birthed. Acts chapter 2 and 3, the day of Pentecost, the church was birthed in Jerusalem. And now they're starving to death, literally because there's a famine in Israel. And then also because these new believers who basically are saying no to Judaism, the ways of their ancestors and their parents, that Jesus truly is the long-awaited Messiah, and salvation is only found through Christ and Christ alone. Well, now they're being rejected. Now they're losing their jobs. There's this severe famine. So Paul, the amazing church planter, begins to network with a lot of the churches that he helped start. Churches in Asia Minor, Macedonia, to try to collect an offering, you could say an end-of-year giving, to help fund the starvation in the church in Jerusalem. But what's interesting is that there's one church that doesn't want to participate. And it just so happens that this one church that, doesn't want to push past the tension, happens to be the most affluent out of all the churches that Paul started. Happens to be the wealthiest church. Anybody want to take a guess where this church was? The church is in Corinth. Yeah. So Paul writes this to them because they are not wanting to participate. They were wealthy, but they were stingy. They had means, but they had no heart. They had arrows, but they had no aim. They were affluent, but they forgot what it was like to struggle. That's why, church, I want you to realize that generosity, just your whole life, giving of yourself, it has little to do with the amount that you give, and it has everything to do with remembering where you came from. Matter of fact, this is the first tension that I see today. If we're gonna draw our arrow and take these shots, making our lives really count, the first tension you gotta push past is the tension of remembering. See, this is why the Macedonians didn't struggle with this. They didn't struggle because they literally knew what it was like to be poor, to have nothing. We know this historically because right around this time period, Rome had invaded Macedonia under the reign of Alexander the Great. This is history. This isn't even biblical history, just world history. And when Alexander the Great came in, they plundered the Macedonians, and they literally took everything, and they left them with nothing. Now, does this make sense? So Paul writes, he says, out of a severe trial, war, and extreme poverty, they lost everything, welled up in rich generosity, so much so that they are literally begging Paul for them to participate in the offering. You wanna know why the Macedonians had this kind of response? Because they knew what it was like to struggle. They knew what it was like to have nothing, and they're hearing about their brothers and sisters in Jerusalem whom they've never met. They never Snapchatted. They didn't see them online. That wasn't around, and they knew what it was like, so they said, we wanna do whatever we can because we remember. You know what that's called, church? That's called empathy. Empathy is a beautiful thing. It is your ability to share in the feelings and the emotions of somebody else. Empathy. It's the reason why a lot of times single moms, You have now raised your kids. You have such a heart and a passion for young single moms. Why? Because you can empathize with them. You remember what it was like crying yourself to sleep, wondering, are you enough for these kids? And the dad's not in their life, working 2 and 3 jobs. Why? You have a heart because you empathize with them. It's the reason why cancer survivors have such a heart for those who are going through cancer. Because you remember what it was like getting the devastating news saying that you have a cancer in your body, and you remember injecting poison and chemo and radiation and feeling horrible and losing your hair and wondering, is this even gonna work? Is this gonna be the thing that takes my life? And now you're a survivor on the other side and you wanna give back to those that are going through it. Why? Because you empathize with them. Church, I pray that we don't ever get so rich that we forget how desperate we were for Jesus. Because when you forget where you used to be, it's hard to show empathy. I'm gonna say that again for the online crowd. We got the academic crowd in the church today. When you forget where you used to be, it is hard to show empathy. And Paul's like to these Corinthians, you have already forgotten. That's why he said, verse 9, I mean, look at it again. He says, for you know. He's like, guys, you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich. Man, church, I feel like this is a word and a warning for us today that we should never get to a place where we forget what Christ has done for us. Don't ever get so saved that you forget that before Jesus, you were spiritually bankrupt, that you had maxed out your sin credit, that you were headed to court and the verdict over your life because of all the wrong that you had done. It doesn't matter how much right or good you would have tried. It still would not have been enough to pay back the sin debt that you equally should have paid on your behalf. And in this moment, your life was hopeless. It was over, and in walks God the judge, and he sits down on his throne and he looks at your life, and just before he puts the verdict down and the gavel hits the desk, in walks Jesus, and he looks at God the Father and he says, whatever this is gonna cost, I'll pay their debt. I'll pay it with my blood. I'll pay it with my body. And in that moment, because of the greatest act of generosity, you went from condemned to freed, from guilty to innocent, from bound to walking in glory, all because Jesus walked into the courtroom of your life. Come on, I'm gonna give him a Thanksgiving praise if you remember this year what he's done for you. Come on, don't ever forget. He saved me. He's healed me. He's changed me. Oh, church, this is my biggest fear of Life Point, by the way, that we just get so comfortable in our seats and, you know, us and no one else, and we sing our little kumbayas and we build these buildings and add on to this space, and I'm the one that this is for, when the reality is, I pray that we always are doing this for people who don't know God yet. Don't ever forget. And the moment we forget is the moment we stop shooting arrows. And so Paul goes on and he's trying to help these Corinthians push past. Look at the next verse. He says this. He says, for I testify that they gave as much as they were able. This is the Macedonians. This would be obedience. In the church world, if you grew up in a church background, we would maybe call that tithing. That there's a spiritual discipline where we honor God in every area of our lives, including our finances. So the first 10% of what I make goes back to God through the local church. This is what they did. And then they did it over and above. Look at, and even, there's our word, beyond. Above and beyond their own ability entirely on their own. Here's the second tension. If we're gonna really draw our arrows and see God do something great, you gotta push past the tension of obligation. The tension of obligation. Can I ask you a question? And you just got to think about this. I don't necessarily need you to yell it out to me unless you want to. But let me ask you, how do you see giving? Think about that. How do you see it? Do you see generosity as an obligation, or do you see it as a privilege? Matter of fact, I think Pastor Bob, he's our life group pastor, I think that's a great question. If you're in a life group this week, you should ask each other that question. If you're going to Starbucks with a group of friends, that's a great question. How do you, just honestly, just be honest with yourself. How do you see generosity? Do you see it as a privilege, or do you see it as an obligation? Because what I've realized is that how you see it determines how you experience it. And how you experience it ultimately will show what you get out of it. Yeah, because you'll never get out of something more than you're willing to put in. So how do you see it? Now, for me, when I was thinking about this idea, I just had this like moment, and I'm just gonna be honest with you, very transparent. I've been a much better dad my second and third time around than I was when our firstborn son, Shaw, came. I really was, and I've shared this in some parenting messages that I've done, and that's on me, that's not on him. I had the wrong expectation. Like I saw parenting as an obligation, not a privilege in the beginning. I didn't know how to connect to this little kid. I didn't know how to be a dad. All I saw were dirty diapers, sleepless nights. I saw this little baby that was getting in the way of my relationship with his mom. That's what I saw. That's what I saw. I wasn't putting it in, and I was getting out exactly what I was putting in. And that's on me, that's not on him. And things changed in my own heart, in my own spirit. And here's how I knew. I kept saying to myself, one day when, the early years, do you do this? Toddler years, one day when, once they sleep through the night, then it's gonna get better. And then they sleep through the night and it's still not better. Once they can walk and crawl, and then they walk and crawl, and then it's not better. Once they can, talk and they go to school, and then maybe I'll be able to connect with my kid. And maybe this is just too real for you, but I saw it as an obligation, not as an opportunity. And I'm telling you this today because how you see generosity ultimately determines what you're getting out of it. How do you see it? The Macedonians clearly saw it as a privilege. The Corinthians clearly saw it as an obligation. This is why Paul would go on in the next chapter and he would continue this same encouragement to these Corinthians that you guys got to see this differently. Look at chapter 9, verse 6. It's the next chapter. He says, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Now, I get it. Let me talk to all of you churched people that have been hurt by church. People who the pastor says giving and you automatically look for the exit doors. I get it. There's a lot of pastors who have taken this verse out of context and they preach some gospel that's about if you give, then automatically you'll get. And I can't speak for that, but I can redeem this. What this principle is, to me, this is just a true principle about anything in life. I mean, think about this. Whatever you put into something is what you're going to get out of it. And we can't expect to get something out that we're not willing to put in. You're not gonna get out a great marriage if you're not willing to put into it a great marriage. And you'll never walk into your bank, has this ever happened to you? It hasn't happened to me, where your bank gives you more money than you actually deposited with them without the interest. It's not gonna happen. But because whatever you put in is what you're gonna get out. And it's interesting because, being a pastor is anyways, I'll write a book about that. But I'll talk to people out in the community and they'll come up to me and I don't know why they feel obligated to say this, but we'll talk. And eventually the conversation goes something like this at some point. I used to go to your church, but I just didn't get anything out of it. And they think that like offends me. It really doesn't offend me, but I think my reply question surprises them because here's what I always say. Oh, you didn't? Well, what did you put into it? Oh, I came today, you just need to know this. I'm gonna help you bypass the Try 5 process. If you're not willing to put anything into this, don't expect to get anything out of this. But I'm telling you today, by all these people that are clapping, if you'll put something into it, if you put your time into it, your talents into it, your treasure into it, your relationships into it, your heart into it, this church will come alive in a way that you've never seen a church come alive. Come on, do you believe that? Why? Because I'll never get out of something I'm not willing to put in. Yeah, and when you see generosity as an obligation, it'll always feel like something that's trying to limit you. Yeah, limit you. And the Macedonians saw it as a great privilege. How do you see it? How do you see it? Do you see giving as an honor, as a privilege? Do you see it as something that I get to do or I have to do? This is what I love about the Spirit of Life Point. And those claps were not, I didn't ask anybody to do that. That's genuine. You know why? Because we have a spirit here at Life Point where we believe that I don't have to, I get to. I don't have to go to church. I get to go to church. I don't have to serve, I get to serve. You mean I get to park cars and be the first impression that people see on a Sunday morning when they pull into the campus? I get to do that. I get to get up here early and help campus set up and put out signs and flags and pray over the whole campus before anybody gets here. I get to do that. I get to hold a door. I get to check kids in. I get to love on babies and teach them about Jesus on a level that they understand. I get to run a camera and tech because I know what it produces. I get to give. I get to watch people get baptized. I get to expand the kingdom of God. Are you kidding me? I get to do this. I don't have to. I come into the presence of God every Sunday and I get in front of him, a God who accepts me broken, flawed, just as I am. And God, I am not here for people to worship me. I am here to worship you. Come on, how many of you, that's your spirit today? Yeah. I'm so passionate about this because I just want so much for you. And Jesus says, well, what did you put into it? Because maybe you're expecting a harvest off of a seed that you didn't sow. What are you putting into it? If you see generosity like the Corinthians, it'll always feel like an obligation. How do you see generosity? If I'm honest with you, a little bit of my journey, I saw generosity for quite a while as an obligation, not a privilege. See, I've been very fortunate to be a part of the Life Point story. Life Point turned 16 this year, and I was able to jump on board when they were 8 months old. And in order for me to be a part of the staff when I first started, this brand new startup church, Southwest Middle School. Anybody from Southwest Middle School still here? Yeah, we see you. I hear your claps. Setting up and tearing down in a middle school cafetorium that smelled like sour milk, but we loved it. We were proud of it. We were birthing something new in the South Charlotte area. God was moving. It was great. And I wanted to be a part of it. And Pastor Matt, the founding pastor of Life Point, said, we want you and your wife, we just got married. We want you to be here, but we can't pay you. I said, okay. What does that mean? I didn't come from a pastor family. And he's like, well, you got to raise support. So I just thought, okay, well, if I have to go and raise my own salary like a missionary, then clearly I'm exempt from tithing, right? Because after all, God understands. I know what I'll do. I'll tithe my time. Okay, I know you've never said that. Isn't it interesting the things that we tell ourselves that we know are not true, but we make ourselves feel better about our disobedience? Is this too strong? Is this too strong? Yeah, and so this is exactly what I was telling myself. And so I'll never forget, my wife and I were 6 months into our marriage. We have our first family budget meeting. It was on a napkin. It was like 7 things, okay? And tithing and giving to the church was not on the budget. And my wife looked at me and she said it straight, y'all, right from the gate. She goes, I don't think you understand who you married. That's a good line 6 months in. She's like, not only are we gonna tithe and give, but it's gonna be the first thing that we do. Because you are not the one going out there and making this happen. We are not the one that's supplying our income. The object of those sentences is I. This is going to come from God. We wanna honor God in every area of our lives. I'm grateful for a wife who saw it as a privilege, not as an obligation. And so we did. And all of a sudden the Lord started using it and started turning it. And now I can't believe that I get to be a part of something so great. But how do you see it? How do you see it? Paul would end this 2 Corinthians 9 part after he talks about sowing and reaping. Look what he says in verse 8. He says, each of you, that's us by the way, you, should give what you have decided in your heart to give. Man, hear this, church. Let the grace of these words fall over your heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Hey, on December the 6th, when we give over and above our regular giving, we're gonna clap, we're gonna celebrate, we're gonna be cheerful in our giving because of what we get to do. And God is able to bless you abundantly so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, somebody underline that word, doesn't say want. So I'm gonna give you all that you need and you will abound in every good work. I tell you, I'm so humbled to be a part of this, and I mean that. This isn't like a humble brag. I am just one link in the chain of what God's doing here. And something really cool has happened. A little Macedonia church response has happened in our church. I've been sitting on this to tell you. But over the last couple months, several families have come to me and kind of gotten together, and they're willing to create a matching fund gift for our end of year giving this year. They've already come together. They've already paved the way. You ready for this? A matching gift of $100,000 on December the 6th. Isn't that incredible? So I'm not gonna insult your intelligence. You know what a matching gift is. They're willing to match dollar for dollar what you give on December the 6th. The beauty of this is, so if your giving just doubled, basically. So if you're gonna give like $1,000, it's like you gave two. If you're gonna give 500, it's like you just gave 1,000. They believe in this vision and this mission and what God is doing so much that they said, we're gonna come together and we're gonna help spur on generosity and challenge the church, dollar for dollar, up to $100,000 on December the 6th. And I want you to know, listen, nobody who gives believes in brick and mortar. Nobody has time for lights and new parking, that's great. But we know what these new spaces are gonna do. We know the power of life change that takes place in a moment. We understand how kids are gonna be invested in right now. We understand the difference that a space can make. So much so that I wanna tell you this story of a friend of ours here at LifePoint named Kelly. Kelly, in her own words, told me that LifePoint helped save her life. And what she meant by that was on July 12th, when we started to regather, she came to LifePoint for the first time. But really, it wasn't the first time, for she had watched us online all through the 3-month pandemic quarantine where we had to close the physical gathering. And God began to use that to really heal her in so many ways. And so, I'll tell you what, her story is so powerful, I can't do it myself. I want you to hear from her. Check this out.
So my name is Kelly Spencer. And the first time I heard about LifePoint was through one of my son's friends named Lori Willman. And she had asked me when I moved here if literally the first time I met her, she was like, do you have a church? And I was like, no. And she's like, come to my church. So she really asked me for a really long time to come, but I wasn't in a good place. So I just wouldn't go. So when it first started was back when I was in high school. I was a really good sprinter and had, broken a lot of records. And, as a freshman and a sophomore, I really was great. And I loved running. I loved it. So since I was good, the track coach that I had was an amazing track coach, aside from this other point, because he did get the most out of me. But what he also did was think that if I were 10 pounds lighter, that I would be faster. So he got it in his head that he was gonna start making me run with 10-pound weights on my back, so I would lose weight. But then when he started commenting on if my time was slower, it'd be because you need to lose a few pounds. So it kind of started like that. And what ended up happening is I really started to lose my self-esteem. So my track coach started doing this. It kind of just progressively got worse. I'd go to school in an outfit and he'd go, that outfit makes you look fat, go home and change. So it just progressively started. And what ended up happening was, because I wasn't losing weight fast enough, he decided that he would start me on diet pills. So one day he was like, you need to take these. And they weren't over the counter. They were prescription diet pills. So I started taking that and, I'd lose weight and, did it make me faster? Probably not. Maybe a little bit, but still. So that's kind of where I have an eating disorder on top of being depressed. And I think that's where it started for me. I describe depression as there's constantly a rain cloud over your head and you never know when it's gonna rain. So that's constantly what you think about. So now that COVID's over, I go, obviously every week that I can. And I've started, your small groups, your life groups, and I made some really nice friends from that. And I'm excited to do that. When Sunday comes, I'm excited. If I'm out of town, my friends know that at whatever time your sermon starts, I'm watching it. There's no missing it. So for the first time in a really long time, I feel God's presence. I can feel him here now. I want to say how much I feel so blessed. I'm so grateful for Life Point. It's had a major impact on my life. And one of the things that Life Point has taught me through Nate's sermons, through people at church, their presence, is that for the first time, probably that I can't even remember, when I look ahead at my life, I see a better future for me. I see me moving forward in a healthier way. And I owe that to, one, God, of course, but I owe that to Life Point in some way, because without it, I don't think I would feel like my best days are ahead of me. And I feel very grateful for the people there that truly have changed my life.
What a powerful story. And can we thank Kelly for her vulnerability and willing to share that with us? This is the reason that I'm just a huge fan of being a part of this church, and why we just love being here and being a part of it is that ultimately we talk about a whole lot of stuff, but at the end of the day, it's giving people the opportunity and putting them in a position where they can really grow and learn and hear a life-changing message and give them hope again. Whether it's here locally or the stuff that we're doing in Ecuador and Honduras and Turkey and in our community and the schools, that's what we get to be a part of. So when we think about it, and again, if you want information, we have both a pamphlet that's in front of you in the seat backs, as well as a card. Ask if you didn't get one already, grab one of those, take them with you today, and continue to pray about what you're going to do on December 6th and helping us to make that story just one of many, many, many more stories that God's going to do here in our community. And so let's be a part of that. Another awesome thing that's kicking off today, and it's going to culminate on December the 6th, is Christmas Village. This goes back again to some of the cool stuff that we get to be a part of here in our city. And you guys, if you've been around here, know that we are big, big partners in the school district. We're working now with several other churches, partnering with the schools, and really identifying high-risk kids and how we can assist and help them. And so the Christmas Village, if you don't fully understand the vision, let me just really make it simple. We're not giving away free stuff to people. What we're actually doing is we're collecting new toys and items that the families, the parents are going to be able to purchase at a reduced price. So they're still giving their kids the gift, but now they can afford it, the same gifts that other kids get. And we're identifying high-risk kids. So it's not just opening up to anybody. Because we want to make a difference in our community and really focus on families. The school program, the after-school program that we do here, the study hall with the churches that we put together, those are the first kids on the list. So it's relationships that we have already. So I really just want to encourage you to think about it. If you don't have information on the Christmas Village, you can get it several ways. Go to the Facebook page, Instagram page. We have links that give the details. Or the easiest way, when you walk out the door, there's a round table with the little hand sanitizer stuff on it. You know, the squirts. So right beside it is some paper. But if you'll pick up one of those, it'll tell you everything you want to know, and get a little squirt. You know, paper squirt. Walk out the door. It's that simple. I'll tell you about it. If you brought your toys today, we have the pod out here open and ready to receive your toys as well. Does that make sense? Out the door, grab paper, squirt, drop off toys, go home, help families. All right? So let's do that this week. Next, let's load that thing up. Force me to get a second pod. Can we do that? And we're going to be doing that right here in this building on December the 13th. Families are going to be showing up here. Cannot wait to be a part of that. So let's stand up and let's go get busy getting some stuff. See you guys.